Hi, everybody. Welcome to our discussion today on the topic of who are you beyond your title? And thank you for joining. It's great to see some of you here today. So before we jump into the discussion, let me introduce myself. My name is Claire Campion. I'm a career transition coach, and I also worked in human resources for many years at companies like Google and Grammarly. And Greta, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. It's nice to be here with you again, Claire. My name is Greta Petruska. I'm a leadership coach and a people strategist, which means that I support companies to build human-centered workplaces. And before this, I worked for McKinsey for 13 years, where I was leading the people function in Central Europe. And I was also supporting two tech companies also in the people space. So that's me.
Great. So I think between us, between our coaching backgrounds, our international backgrounds, and our backgrounds in human resources, that's why this topic feels very relevant today for us to discuss.
Yes, absolutely. And you are reading the news as much as I do, and the question keeps on popping up in my mind, like how people going through the transitions they are, put through, and it's sometimes it's not by choice. And also we went through quite a bit of transitions ourselves, so I guess this is the topic we are often discussing. So we thought that it might be helpful to share our perspective on this topic.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, as you mentioned, every day I open my phone and I see the news. There's talk of companies doing layoffs, unfortunately, and it seems to be the new norm, I would say. And then, in my business as a coach, when I'm talking to people, the big thing that many people are talking about is like adapting to change in the workplace, because I think a number of years ago, the workplace was more stable. People had a job for as long as they wanted it, and you decided when you want to leave. And now things have changed very much, and companies are proactively restructuring on a regular basis. Unfortunately, people are losing their jobs. And then with the advent of AI, it's just like a very turbulent time, I would say, at
Yeah.
the moment.
Yeah. And I would actually also add that, yeah, current situation in workplaces are not great from this perspective. But I also believe that, who are you beyond the title? It also comes to situations around being an immigrant, or, choosing to become a mother and going back to work, or, choosing a new career path, or even aging, So there are so many life situations when this question might pop up in our head. So yeah, it's kind of like, I feel like, an universal question, and can be applied to many different life circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we're both living in the US now. Definitely part of the US culture, and something that was very obvious to me when I moved here, is that part of your whole identity, like work is a huge part of your identity, definitely here on the west coast of America. And maybe it's because like Silicon Valley here, we have the big entertainment hubs in Los Angeles, but work makes up a huge part of someone's identity.
Yeah.
Would you, what were your observations around that when you moved to the US? Was it a surprise for you, or was it something you were already kind of aware of before you moved over?
I was definitely not aware of. Um, I actually found myself in a situation when everything I knew was kind of like stripped away from me. And again, it was by choice. I choose to move to the US. But I didn't realize how difficult it is going to be for me without, like, uh, I don't want to say like a significant title, but like when I worked for McKinsey, it was a name and it was a brand and it was a prestige. And when I said that, everybody was kind of like recognized it. And it was a huge part of my identity. And so when I moved to the US, actually 2 days before I was let go of my startup job, so suddenly I was unemployed. And, I was this immigrant lady, and I didn't really know how to deal with that and how to introduce myself. And And of course, I pushed myself to go to all sorts of networking events because I had to build my community here, and I also had to find a job. And when you only have like 90 seconds to introduce yourself, and it has to be very impactful, and you don't have a job, you don't have a title, like how you do that, it was actually very hard for me. And I obviously found a way around it, but this is definitely not something I was prepared for.
Yeah, I think
How did you manage this? How did you manage the West Coast culture from this regard?
yeah, I would say, when I moved from Europe to the West Coast, I was already working with Google. So, I what I but one of my first observations when I started socializing in Silicon Valley after work drinks, doing things at the weekends, the first question people would ask me in any kind of social circle was always, "Who do you work for?" It was the
Hmm.
very first question. And I definitely was taken aback in the beginning that this was always the first question people asked me. Because coming from Europe, that's not something I was used to. In Europe, when you would be out on a night out, that would come like maybe 2 or 3 hours into the conversation, if at all. So yes, when I responded, "Oh, I work for Google, etc.," because it was a prestigious company and still is very much, you had that instant acceptance and
Yeah.
instant gratification, and you're automatically part of like the tech club or the in club. So it did feel really nice, honestly. You didn't have to explain who were Google and what did they do. People just instantly knew.
Yeah, and there is, how should I say, it's nice and easy and smooth, right? You don't need to explain yourself, and
Yeah.
you are part of the game in a way. And
Yes.
I was wondering, you spent like 11 years at Google, and also you decided to leave Google, so it was on your own terms. Like, what happened afterwards? Like, how did you dealt with the situation when your title and this whole package just disappeared from your life?
Yes, one thing I would say is, when you work at a company for that long, it's not just, your work. It becomes like your whole ecosystem because you travel a lot, you become friendly with people at work. All of your benefits are done through the company. It's almost like they look after 95% of your life. You also because these are, and Google specifically is like a high performance company, and you work long hours, but you get to work on interesting stuff. But it does mean that you don't have huge amounts of free time for hobbies or maybe spending as much time as you would like with your family. So when you kind of offboard and you come out the other side from a company where you've given like so much of your time, your life, your friendships, there is a feeling of just like being disorientated because you're
Yeah.
like, okay, I have to kind of build my whole ecosystem again. Even it may sound silly, but really basic things like I have to go find a dentist, I have to go and find a doctor, I have to get a new phone. Like I almost felt like I was a child again, like doing all these things. But for me, actually, by the time I left Google, I had made peace with it. I'd been there for 11 years. I'd done all the roles that I wanted to do, and I was ready for something new. But in the 18 months to 2 years before I left, I would say that's when I had like the most turbulence internally because I was giving more of myself to the role than I wanted to give. But when you're in a high performance culture, you're constantly being asked for more and more. And it's very hard to say no because in these companies, you're rewarded by doing well, promotion, output, and all of your colleagues are doing the same. And you definitely feel like, we're all working towards this vision or this mission together. And so by not giving your all, it wasn't something that sat comfortably with me. But then there was this constant tension between, okay, is this job aligned with where I am now in my life? Because my priorities are starting to change after 8, 9 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sharing. And I was just thinking that uh, when I left McKinsey, it was a huge, almost like 100% of my identity was, associated with work and everything I've done for work. And so again, it was my decision to leave the company, but it felt like the whole huge building I was building throughout many, many, many years by layers and layers and layers. it just collapsed over time. And the next day nobody is calling. You don't feel you are creating impact. Okay, how to stay productive? What I was like, oh my God, I have time to just like watch a movie or like just like sleep properly, which are very basic things. But when this whole building collapsed, I'm like, how am I gonna rebuild everything? And as you were saying, it's not just work, it's your community, it's your friends, it's your self-worth, it's prestige and everything, your whole life. And actually, when I moved to LA and became an immigrant, I realized, and I went through a very similar pattern. Like, okay, so how will I again rebuild from scratch? And I was devastated, and this time I was even isolated from my family, my friends, everything I've known before. And during this isolation, I had to realize that I am not rebuilding from scratch. I didn't have to start from zero because I have so much life experience, and I'm still learning and I'm still building my life, but there is so much I learned throughout the years that I can capitalize that knowledge. And now when I'm talking about this, it's so obvious. But when I was in this situation and in this mindset, it didn't seem like that. And and I think the good news is when something collapses, you actually, or when you believe that something collapsed completely, you have the freedom to pick the building blocks which you will use to and I don't even want to say rebuild, but actually use to continue your life. And that
Mhm.
building might be look completely different than the previous one, and that's actually I feel like that's a luxury. That's a great opportunity, and of course you need to take the time to reflect and realize that what are the elements which you like, which you want to build on and continue. But being in this situation is actually a great opportunity. And after 2 years now, obviously I see it from a different lens. And but that was the biggest learning for me in the past couple of transitions I went through.
I definitely resonate with what you said. Like when I think about the different jobs I've had over my career, I kind of now think of them as like chapters in my life. So
Mm.
my life is a book, and then these are the different chapters. And when I leave a company, I'm like closing that chapter and moving on to the next one. Sometimes with some sadness or some grief, but also on the other hand, you're like excited for the future and for new things. I was going to ask you, when you look back on your long stint that you had at McKinsey and you think about like your identity, as we talked about, like being wrapped up in the job and, our whole lives, what would you say is like your biggest learning looking back on that now?
um I would say that every situation is a learning opportunity. And I had like a long run at McKinsey,
Hmm.
and I just grew so much, and I took all kinds of opportunities to improve myself and meet new people, and actually just like learn and consume as much as I could to become a better version of myself. And McKinsey was a great place for that. Um, Maybe one additional thing which I would highlight is that if I think about like how ambition kind of like brought closer to myself versus kind of like drifted me away from myself. and
Hmm.
and I have to say that at the beginning I was very much aligned with I was doing and how things were going. And as I grew, as I became like more and more experienced, I realized that my value system also shifted. So what I was doing was not necessarily 100% aligned with who I am anymore. And and I think you were also explaining this tension in yourself. And I believe that when this happened, you have to give yourself space to reflect and realize that, okay, this situation is not serving me anymore. And how can I change it? Can I change it? It's always a question if you have power over it. Sometimes when you are working in huge companies and big corporations, usually you don't have influence over how things are
Hmm.
set up. So the question remains like, can you accept that, or can you change yourself? And it might be that you cannot change yourself. So the way is the way out. Um, but again, like giving yourself the space to think about it, reflect it, it's extremely important. And having the self-awareness that what is happening is not serving you anymore, it's just extremely important, and the catalyst to making the decisions which are best for you.
Hmm. And I know we started this conversation today saying, this topic is very topical right now. And one of the reasons is obviously because of all the layoffs that are happening. And so in those situations, people are not being given the choice. They're not
Yeah.
voluntarily leaving their company. They're being told, they walk into work one day and they're being told, unfortunately, we don't need you anymore, or we're downsizing. Whereas I was reading last night in Meta, they've already announced they're going to cut 8,000 people
Yeah.
in the next weeks. And there's already kind of this panic amongst the workforce that is like, who's staying, who's going, and the turmoil that goes with that. But for anybody watching this today, in terms of if you've been let go from a company and you have been in that situation where you were in the bubble of your company for the last number of years, what advice or things worked for you when you left McKinsey that helped you like almost shed that identity and then like move forward onto your next chapter?
Honestly, I'm not sure I could fully shed it. It's still part of my story, and I'm still, when I'm introducing myself, I don't start with work related stuff, but
Yeah.
at some point it comes to the picture that I work for McKinsey. So I don't think I will be ever will be able to shed that. Um, but what I would say, on one hand, process, like give yourself time to process, because it's not going to happen over time. And probably the second would be ask for help, because if your work is so much part of your identity, the chances that you can pass through that is alone is not super high from my perspective. and
Mm-hmm.
um and I always extremely valued people's opinion and advice and perspective who had longer life experiences or work experiences than mine. And and I also believe that shifting perspectives are the most difficult. So you can say, oh my God, I worked for this company for 10 years, what am I going to do now? And maybe someone comes in and help you, like put light on your strengths, your opportunities. And maybe if you start talking to people, you realize that there are, I don't know, 5 other opportunities you can apply for. So obviously, like bringing in like outside in perspective, that was very helpful for me and still is. And maybe the third one is really like reflect on your values and your strengths. I believe that going back to your values as the North Star is is really really critical, especially if you were part of an organization for 10 years. You just go with the flow, and sometimes you don't even know that is it still aligned with me, because you are so much in survival mode and just pushing through and just focusing on performance. Then you forget, and just like having an understanding of like your values as the base and the foundation, it was very helpful for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
How about
Those are
you?
really, yeah, those are really good tips. I was thinking about this last night when I was thinking about preparing for this call. And it took me some time to go through my brain and figure out like what were the things that intentionally worked when I left the company
Mm,
and what were kind of like nice to have. So I would say, yeah, a few things. I think, you know, when you're at a company for a long time, when you're, as we mentioned, like a lot of your friends and colleagues are from that world. And so when you're outside the company, you feel like, oh, I'm quite disconnected from like, let's say recruiters and people in other industries, naturally so, because you've been busy with your job for a number of years. So I would say it's like engaging with people from other industries, other companies, just to gain perspective. Because I think if you're in a company for a long time, your perspective becomes very like you may have the company view, or you just like you're in a different seat. And so then
mm,
when you're like on the market looking for a new job, it's engaging with people from different industries and not all automatically dismissing some by saying like, you know, oh, I used to work in tech, so I'm only going to work in tech again, or I only work, you know, my background was in finance and I will only consider a finance company, because the workforce is just changing so rapidly. I think that's how jobs used to work, but now there's a lot more like fungibility. And I think also if your title was like, I don't know, financial analyst or human resources business partner, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can only look for that job again in the future, that like you have to, like sometimes we self-impose these rules on ourselves and you're like, I can only search for a job based on X because that's my experience. But also this is like a good time to, like as you said, reevaluate, look at what are your strengths, what are your interests, what are the things that motivate you, can you get a job that's maybe more aligned with that. I would say not being, you mentioned this, not being afraid to ask for help, because sometimes when you leave these high performance companies, like your ego is a little bit bruised or your pride, and you don't want to ask for help. And I think some cultures, um, I would say that's ingrained more. I would say, like being from Ireland, we are not necessarily the most forthcoming in saying I need help. We're usually brought up along the lines of, you know, you'll figure it out yourself, and just ask for help like if you're really, really need it, but otherwise kind of just take it in your stride and figure it out. Because everybody else is doing that networking and coffee chats and so on. And if you don't start doing that, I feel like you may be a little bit behind.
yeah, I definitely, double down on that. Like you never know, like who you meet and what that meeting will trigger. So yes, and when you are still in the phase of processing, the especially when you were let go after many years, it's hard to like put on a smiley face and go and network and share what you went through. I really understand that, but isolating ourselves is definitely not helpful. And um, and also I would say that trying to maintain a positive mindset, and I'm saying it with hesitation because I don't want to signal like this toxic positivity or anything like that,
Mhm.
but trust the process and really like when you are ready after you process the situation, go and meet with people and gain energy and positive energy from your surroundings and what you were saying that especially when we work at jobs for many years, our friends and our community is part of our working relationships. So like
Mhm.
shifting that and going to places which energizes us. So for example, I love painting, I love flowers, I love cooking. So just like thinking through like what energizes you and selecting different locations and communities which actually helping you to meet people in the area which gives you positive energy. It helps mentally so much to go through the difficult period, or at least for me it was very helpful.
Yes. And I think, you know, we talked about maybe at our last conversation that we did a few weeks ago, that when you lose your job, typically you do go through like that cycle of grief. You're angry and then you move into ultimately acceptance. But I do think you need to give yourself the time to move
Yeah.
through that. And if you have lost your job, even if you have financial pressure or you are the main breadwinner, giving yourself at least a little bit of time to just process things. And as you said, like get to a place where that if you're going for interviews, like you're going to show up well, and that you don't want to show up like still carrying the baggage maybe from the last job or from the layoff. So it may sound counterintuitive because you think I have to get a job quickly. There's lots of people on the job market, go, go, go. But taking that space to just reflect a little bit and figure out, like, what do I want to do? How can I find the silver lining in this situation? Because while these things are unfortunate when they happen at the time, and I've also been laid off once in my life, so I've been there, and I know it does feel really crappy, for want of a better word. Um, a silver lining usually comes from it, and it may be like a few months later, but ultimately something good will come out of it, or an opportunity that you'd never thought of, potentially a relocation to another country. Like it could be anything, but if you keep your mind open, I think that's when these opportunities just rise to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe here, Amy, do you have any questions? We didn't say at the beginning, but obviously we would be very happy to address anything which you are interested in it specifically.
So I really appreciate bringing in things that are creative because I think when you have the scaffolding of your identity and um, a routine, it can be really hard to adjust to a transition. And so the way that both of you have brought in kind of like interesting feel good ways of just being in the world so you're not like at home or isolated. And I love the way that both you, Claire, and you, Greta, have brought in just some really adaptable things also for any career change. You know, it could be for a mom or for a politician or for a business owner, whatever. Like, I just think it's adaptable for all. So I would just really appreciate the ways you've given some tactical things that someone can actually start doing today. So I want to say that. I have one question, and that is something that's really hard, like having been a business owner, having been a political wife and doing a lot of political work, having done a lot of nonprofit and fundraising and all of that when I became a mom. So then I shifted, all my PR stuff, director of PR of a major development and all of that to nonprofit galas, hosting, fundraising things at my house, things like that. Now I'm in LA and I don't have the scaffolding of my social connections to be a part of all these galas and all that. Here's the question. People ask, what do you do? And I literally, in my mind, I'm like, I don't know yet. But that's not really necessarily the best response. And anyway, that's my question. It's hard to say. It's like, well, what don't I do in one hand? Because I manage my finances, I manage my properties. I'm looking for things. I've done so much. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to find something that represents the entirety of who I am. To your point, Claire, about like all the wisdom that you've acquired, and you, Greta, too, like all the things you've done make you who you are. And so you meet someone interesting. How do you encapsulate and represent that without it just being like, I don't know? I mean, I could be a bum on the beach, like here to get a tan, but I'm not. So, yeah, that's the question. Thanks for fielding it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Claire, do you mind if I take this one? Because at the beginning, when I moved to LA, I always started that, well, I'm an immigrant. I'm new to LA. And for me, it was, and I'm still struggling with that, to be honest, this part of my identity. But then I had to think about it. Okay, what does it mean to be an immigrant? And then I realized that it means courage. It means that, I'm just like an explorer, and I'm so many different things. I'm not just an immigrant. And slowly I started to move away from this introduction, and I don't say it anymore because I realize it's just not relevant. And I'm like, I'm so many things. And I had to adjust to every situation how I'm introducing myself. And in a way, I'm still probably in the camp where you are at. And oftentimes I just say that, I'm actually like building my life in LA, and it has many different parts. It has personal parts, it has professional parts. But honestly, and yeah, I will say it's none of their business. And if it really, it's none of their business. And so if you still don't know, that's okay, and that's understandable, because you are in transition and it takes time for you to figure it out. And for me, when it comes to my professional identity, I'm still figuring out, like, am I a coach, am I a consultant, an advisor, whatever. And I don't have one line, a perfect line, which helps me to introduce myself. So I always, as I said, I adjust to a specific situation. And when I don't want to answer, because sometimes I'm like this, like, it's none of your business, and I don't want to explain to you my whole life. I just say, like, I'm busy building my professional practice, and there are certain elements, this and this and that, and I leave it there. And actually, I often use the tactic of coaching and ask a question and be curious to the other person. So once I learn more about my discussion partner, I actually can adjust how I further introduce myself or continue introducing myself. So I would say that, first of all, don't feel pressure to answer that question. And if you want to answer, you can always, say something in the lines that you are in transition or you are building something. And that's okay. And that's okay until you figure it out. Don't worry about anybody else, just yourself, like what makes you feel good and feel comfortable, and go with that. But I would give Claire an opportunity to reflect on this question as well, and what I just said.
Yes, thank you, Amy. This is a great question for us to end on. I would say, I definitely echo Greta's advice. I would say, as women, we often feel pressure like to justify ourselves or our
Yeah.
position, both when we're in the workforce and outside. So I think we often put this pressure on ourselves, like I have to come up with a good answer, and it needs to be like this seamless one-line sentence or this elevator pitch, as we're often thought. Um, and I think we put that pressure on ourselves. It's not necessarily written anywhere, or. So I think, as a suggestion, you could, to Greta's point, you can just say, I'm a business owner. Tell me more about what you do. Um, don't feel like you have to spend like a few minutes kind of justifying all the different things that you do, because you already know your self-worth and your value and all of those things and what you bring to the world. And sometimes people are curiously asking this question as opposed to, in a kind of a salesy way. So sometimes it's interpreting like, what's their intention? Are they going to try and sell you something? Or is this just like a casual conversation where you met at a social or networking event? So
Yeah.
hopefully that's useful. I know we're slightly over time, which is a
Which
good
is a good
sign.
sign. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the follow. And I know we're done, but I just want to say, I think for women, especially women over like 30 or whatever, it can sort of feel like I'm a complex human who's lived an interesting life. And so I want to have a good one liner that represents all that I am. I don't need to explain it, but I feel like it's hard to find like a one sentence of, you know what I mean? That I'm not just a mother or just a property owner or just a whatever. And you're right, Claire. Like, it's not about, I know who I am. I don't need the validation, but I think we all want to feel relevant. Like, we're complex, interesting women, and not like just a mom or just an ex-wife or just a, you know what I mean? And so I like to think about, just because of also my age and feeling like someone who's relevant and, you know, done some interesting things and therefore has interesting things to contribute to the world. So that's where my question kind of comes from. But I really appreciate your answers, both of you. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, everyone who joined today. We will be posting this recording on our YouTube channel. Stay tuned for our third conversation. We usually put it out as a poll on LinkedIn and ask for some feedback, or if you're watching this and you have a topic that you'd like for us to discuss, just send us a DM on LinkedIn and we'd be happy to consider it. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.